Buckle up for a deep dive into one of the most chilling unsolved cases in American history. We're heading back to the 1970s, to the seemingly safe suburbs of Detroit.
Ah, yes, the Oakland County Child Killer. A case that still sends shivers down your spine, even decades later.
Absolutely. What's always stuck with me about this case is the killer's MO. It wasn't a simple abduction and murder. He or she held these kids captive for days, sometimes even weeks.
Yeah, that's a real curveball. It's not the typical pattern you see in these types of crimes, and it raises all sorts of questions about the killer's psychology. What were they doing with these kids all that time? What was their motivation?
Exactly. Between 1976 and 1977, 4 children vanished from their neighborhoods. Mark Stebbins, Jill Robinson, Christine Mahilich, and Timothy King. 2 boys, 2 girls, all between the ages of 10 and 12.
That consistency in the victims is a huge red flag, right? Same age range, same gender split. That tells us the killer probably had a very specific type of victim in mind.
And when their bodies were eventually found, they were all meticulously cared for, dressed in their best clothes, hair combed. That just adds another layer of creepiness to the whole thing.
Oh, yeah. It's a bizarre detail for sure. I mean, on the one hand, it seems to suggest some level of twisted affection or care. But on the other hand, it could be a way for the killer to maintain control.
Absolutely.
To play with the families and the police.
You can only imagine the fear that gripped the community back then. Parents were terrified to let their kids out of their sight. Playgrounds were deserted. Every stranger was a potential suspect.
Oh, absolutely. These kinds of cases can really tear a community apart. They shatter that sense of safety and security that people take for granted. It makes everyone question everything and everyone.
And rightfully so. There were even whispers of a pedophile ring operating in the area, possibly connected to a man named Christopher Bush.
Right, Christopher Bush. Now, Bush was definitely a person of interest in the case. He had a history of, well, let's just say he had some issues. But to this day, there's no conclusive evidence directly linking him to the murders.
So we're left with a lot of theories, but no definitive answers.
Yep. And the investigation back then was, well, it was hampered by the limitations of the time. DNA analysis wasn't even a thing back then. They were relying on fingerprints, witness statements, that sort of thing.
It must have been incredibly frustrating for the investigators and even more so for the families of the victims.
Oh, absolutely. Can you imagine the agony of not knowing who killed your child or why? And then to have so few answers, so little to go on. It's just heartbreaking.
Has there been any progress in the case recently with the advancements in DNA technology and all that?
Yeah, there have been some efforts to re-examine the evidence using modern techniques, but so far, no major breakthroughs.
So where does that leave us?
Well, I think it leaves us with a sense of profound sadness, really, for the victims, for their families, for a community that still bears the scars of this tragedy.
It's a reminder that even in the most seemingly idyllic places, darkness can lurk.
And that some mysteries, unfortunately, remain unsolved.
Well, that was a heavy one. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the Oakland County Child Killer case. I hope it's given you all something to think about.
Oh, absolutely. It's a case that deserves our attention, even after all these years.
If anyone out there has any information about this case, no matter how small or insignificant it may seem, please come forward. You never know what detail could be the missing piece of the puzzle. And maybe, just maybe, we can finally bring some peace to the families of these innocent children.
It's a long shot, but sometimes that's all it takes. One small lead, one new piece of evidence, and everything can change.